Well, good morning, everyone. This is Stuart Schaefer. I'd like to welcome you to the P&G Alumni Cincinnati Chapter webinar for Human-Centered Design for Leadership and Innovation. This is our one of our series of webinars this year, and our next one is going to be a social event for a holiday party. Watch your invitations for that. Also want to thank our sponsor, Johnson Investments, who make all of this possible, and especially Mike Stannis, who's our treasurer, P&G alum, and our contact information was in your invite and will be sent with you with a link. This is being recorded so that you can share it with folks later. All right. Well, with that put out of the way, I'm going to turn this over to our panel host, John Gleason. John, take it away.
Hello, P&G Alumni Network. How are you? I hope you all are wearing pink, as apparently your presenters are, in a completely unscripted, unplanned way. Welcome to this webinar. One of the things that the three of us, the three panelists, had discussed is this idea of human-centered design, and you'll also hear a term design thinking. As a way of trying to share our experiences with these principles, these tools, and hopefully inspire you, or maybe have you give the next one on these webinars. Let me begin to share, but as we do that, I'd like Holly and Audrey to say hello and do a very brief introduction, because there's a bit of a bio in the invitation, and this isn't about us, this is about you. So Audrey, why don't you kick us off?
Yes, John, thank you. And good morning, everyone. Let me first of all just say how honored I am to be part of this conversation. I always get such energy from these types of conversations. So very thankful with a lot of gratitude. My name's Audrey McGuckin, and I'm the CEO of the McGuckin Group. And all of my working career, I've been focused on human-centered leadership. I hope to share some of these stories with you. And I've had the pleasure to really come alongside John and Holly through many engagements and share our experiences. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Audrey. We're so thrilled to have you join today as well. And I'm Holly O'Driscoll. And wow, I am a P&G alum. Spent more than 22 years inside of P&G, and the last role that I had was really leading the global design thinking effort, and have since kind of kept that going and transitioned that into my consulting practice. My firm is called Ampersand Innovation. So excited to share the stories of human-centeredness and how that applies not only to innovation, but leadership as we go on our time together today. So thanks, John, for pulling us together to talk about a topic that we all care about so much.
I'm delighted. And finally, John Gleason. Holly and I spent some time in P&G's design organization, which is what inspired me to leave P&G and start my own thing to help organizations elevate design as a strategic business competence. And with that, let me get us started with our presentation. So there is no P&G meeting that is done without an agenda. Very briefly, we're going to do a flyover of human-centered design. And as I mentioned, we also will use design thinking as the surrogate for this. We'll share a few examples of brands that have been inspired by human-centeredness. Importantly, what we want to do also is have this conversation. Design thinking and human-centered design is often thought of as something to create products or services. But what we want to spend some of the discussion today is how human-centeredness applies to leadership and inspiring each other. And then we want to end with the ability for you all to contribute questions, your own stories, and have a discussion. So Stuart, if you wouldn't mind launching the poll, we're going to ask the question, what level of knowledge or experience do you all have with human-centered design or design thinking? So fill in where you fit here.
I love how you framed the polling questions, John.
Well, thought we'd have a little bit of fun here.
Indeed.
In fact, Stuart censored it. I wanted to say I should be teaching this thing instead of John, but he kindly censored that.
Very fun.
And Stuart, as it looks like we're getting close to a majority, why don't you close that and show people where we are? So Holly, Audrey, good news is today we're not threatened for people who should be teaching. There's a range, and so we will touch on. Hopefully, we've appropriately metered this in a way that that it will offer value for everyone here. And please, there is a chat function. Let's close that poll, Stuart. There is a chat function at the bottom of your screen. If you have questions, feel free. I tell you what, put the questions in the Q&A, and then we'll also leave the chat function open for additional thoughts for people who want to provoke thoughts or share some examples. So with that said, Holly, why don't you kick us off into the intro into human-centered design?
Yeah, thanks so much for that, John. So, wow, this is so exciting to be sharing this topic with you today. The idea of human-centered design is really rooted in applying those principles and mindsets and methods that are often trained in design programs to all sorts of other problems. And so how do you take some of those skill sets and mindsets and apply them to challenges in a whole variety of sectors? And I think the key differentiator that it really makes human-centered design different than others, other ways of working, is this shamelessly human-centered approach, right? What does this mean? People first. And that people matter more than anything else that we do. And whether that's technology or a cost structure system or a launch date, right? People matter more. And so design thinking and human-centered design take all of the inspiration from people. And this mindset is really about serving others, right? It's not about maybe some of the traditional business metrics. It's really about making a difference for people. And one of the things that's been emerging in this space over the last decade or so is not only is this about products, services, or experiences, but these same principles, which we'll unpack in a moment, also apply to leadership and organizational challenges. So we'll hit on the collection of those as we go on our time together today, but really rooted in these principles of human-centered design are these skill sets that are taught inside of design schools. So I think we'll go to the next slide as well, and I'll reveal some of those, no? Yeah, so here they are. These are the 5 principles that were made famous by the Stanford University D School. And it's intentionally a little d, right? That's the way that they talk about themselves. And so these are the principles: empathy, right? Deep understanding of what it looks and feels like for someone else, right? And to understand their reality. This is about integrating head and heart, right? A lot of us are really comfortable sitting in that head space, something that's a little more data focused. And, you know, data can be many different things. That can be a story, an experience, and really understanding what it looks and feels like to be someone else. So as we think about these different principles, definition, defining the problem, what really is the problem to be solved? Often we are asked to solve a challenge that may or may not be the real issue at hand. And how do we drive clarity on what that looks like, and recognizing that empathy for someone else often informs that. So any builds that you guys want to add to those 2 first principles, Audrey and John?
Audrey, go ahead.
No, I actually love the simplicity of this model, and I'm excited to share, particularly from the human capital and leadership side, some of the stories just here as we get going.
Yeah, for sure.
So the build that I would have on this is many of you out there who are listening in, part of a proctor system that had a fairly rigid stage gate set of systems that you can't get to the next one until you've completed the previous one. Design thinking is intended to be iterative. If you need to go backward for clarification, for additional definition, and as you progress through this set of principles, that's okay, because the intention is to really get rooted in the user of your products. And how many of you have been a part of initiatives where you said, oh, I already know everything I need to know about the consumer or the user, and you move on and you don't go clarify and you don't define. And so one of the things that Holly and I have done this a couple of times, where we want to remind people, fight the urge to solve too soon, because the human brain, especially with the urgency that P&Gers are trained to operate in, we want to solve stuff, we want to fix stuff. And so take the time and the energy to make sure you truly understand the frustrations and the pain and the joys of consumers or users, and use that as a way of inspiring a definition, a very distinct problem before you begin to solve. So Holly, I'll turn it back to you.
I love that, John, right? Because I think it lines up with this space that, all of us would often raise our hands and say, we're really proud to be problem solvers. I dream of a time when we also are equally proud to say we're problem finders, and we're discovering problems, and we're looking at what really is going on in that way. And we're able to fall in love with the end user, whether that's an employee, whether that's a client, a customer, a consumer, whoever your stakeholder is, falling in love with them and their challenge is really core to human-centeredness and how we think about bringing that to life. I'll move along to ideation, and you might say, oh, ideation is just brainstorming. And I'm going to do a yes and to that to kind of role model some of the principles of ideation. But ideation is around structured brainstorming, right? How do you get to ideas in a way that really has some method to the madness, and to bring some ideas to life that way? And then forwarding a bit into prototyping, how do you physicalize that idea? How do you move beyond the one-page memo, which all of us, right, learned immediately when we joined P&G how to craft with excellence and speed? How do we move beyond the one-page memo and physicalize that idea and bring it to life, right? How do you sketch? How do you build something? I can't tell you how many times I've been leading a workshop and hand someone a marker and say, great, keep going, draw the idea. And they say, time out, I write memos, right? I got to go to the bathroom. I got to hop on a call. I got to get out of here because it's so darn uncomfortable to physicalize the idea. And so when we think about building in these principles of human-centeredness into this model of design thinking, prototyping becomes such a cornerstone. And then you throw it back and say, hey, consumer, customer, stakeholder, what do you think, right? That's testing it. That's putting it in front of your end user. And, why does that matter at the prototyping phase? Why would they react to something that you've made from kind of kindergarten style craft supplies? Because iteration is important, and it's a great way to minimize risk, right? How do we put the idea out there, have the consumer build feedback into that, or the stakeholder, right? I don't want to leave out employees. And when you think about organizational challenges that get tackled here, and Audrey will come on in a bit and talk about kind of the leadership component, which has such potential to apply these principles, arguably now more than ever. But testing, and then you can kind of start over, right? You go back and you get the feedback again through that empathetic lens, and continue that cycle going forward. So anything to add to this, John or Audrey, as we think about kind of fleshing out the context of the design thinking model?
Yeah, Holly, I might build on it early from a leadership perspective. I've spent the last 3 decades working with leaders, from CEOs to different levels in the organization, and I have a strong belief that leaders are born and made. And so the one add that I would say is, we all have certain profiles and characteristics that are natural, inherent in our DNA. And then there are ones that we need to learn. I know for sure that my sweet spot was not in the empathizing because of my own profile. And so I've spent a lot of years learning some of the aspects. Other people are very strong in the prototype space. But I think the secret is the ability to flex through all of this, and the ability to have a forcing function that causes you to pause before you push.
Yeah, I love that context, Audrey, to really pause and say, wow, what am I missing? Right? Have I really thought about, different perspectives coming into this? Or have I built the right team with the right skill set to go after this challenge at hand? Yeah, absolutely. Lots of reasons to pause as we think about bringing this work to life.
So one build I would have on this, Holly, is prototype. And again, thinking about the audience on this webinar, P&Gers, a prototype tended to be something that was fairly finished and fairly well polished before they started to show it to people. And the thinking around design thinking and being human-centered is start with high quantity, low fidelity. And you've mentioned sketch, you've mentioned things like that. And it literally is starting with something very, very low fidelity to trigger your own thinking, but also begin to engage other people in that thinking. What do you think about this? If the button were here on this app instead of here, or what does this click to? What does this product look like? What does this service deliver? It's a way of not only refining your own thinking for the problem you're trying to solve that you've established at the define stage, but it begins to refine, oh, I hadn't considered that. And sometimes a doodle and a sketch opens your mind to things like that. And it begins, how do you engage others, whether it's a consumer in co-creation, whether it's leadership to bring them along instead of have a big unveiling at some point that surprises them and they're not aligned to it. And so the prototyping phase becomes critical as a way of trying to bring together the empathy and definition, but also how's this thing going to show up in the market, whether it's an internal policy, whether it's an organization structure, whether it's a product or a service. And a lot of this, Audrey, I'm reminded, a lot of this comes from the ability for anybody in the process to role model.
Yes.
Holly, you and I were a part of the design organization when A.G. Lafley was the CEO.
Yeah.
And one of the things that he did that I think was so incredibly simple but so powerful was he role modeled what he wanted to happen whenever he traveled to a market to meet with a team, a business unit, a region, a function. He always wanted to be in a consumer's home, and he wanted to be in a marketplace co-shopping with a shadowing a consumer or a shopper before he met with the teams. Mm-hmm. And it reinforced the ability for everybody to be able to do those things by his own action, not just by his words. And it was so incredibly powerful.
Yeah, all great examples of how to bring these principles to life, right? And all anchored in that spirit of shamelessly human-centered. This is about the people, and how do we serve them in this really powerful way of looking at problems through a different lens, right? And imagining what's possible and then getting those in front of users. John, you remind me of a workshop that I was facilitating just before one of the downsizings, kind of 2012-ish, right? And was with the finance organization, and they were trying to work on, what does an organizational model look like with 10% less people? And you might say, wow, that sounds like an unexpected kind of application for design thinking, but I think it's really reaching into those organizational challenges. And this resulted in very senior finance folks, mapping out models and then bringing them to life using paper plates and pipe cleaners to talk about an organizational design, and building a layer cake and talking about here's what's different and here's how this is going to change as a result of this new model. So even things that feel a little bit more maybe elusive as related to prototypes are also very effective at communicating ideas. Who thought that an organizational design could be made of paper plates and pipe cleaners and then explained by a finance executive? And absolutely, it's happening all the time. So really excited to talk more about these examples as we jump in.
Holly, I might share to build off John's story, really about role modeling. And it just really reminded me of a story. Really, when I first started working, I was the HR generalist, and the CEO at the time, anytime he would go and visit a factory, he would say, take me to the shop floor. And so, you know, that's always the first thing he did, and it was role modeling. But I asked him why. Why do you do that? Why do you want to go to the shop floor? And he said, you know, I literally want to be able to walk in the shoes of those people building our products. And if I think about an internal consumer model, he was really thinking about those people on the shop floor who were grinding every day, and he wanted to experience that from their vantage point. And then I think this goes to this beautiful piece around being human-centered and design thinking is, how does that inspire others? And I was inspired later on in my career when I joined a board. And so it's the City of St. Pete, and it's the Police Athletic League. And their purpose is to build relationships between the police officers and the predominantly Black teenagers in the most poor areas of St. Petersburg. And so when they asked me to join the board, I was reminded of my CEO, and I said, can I walk the floor? And of course, there is no floor in a boardroom when you're on a board, but the cop threw the bulletproof jacket on me, threw me in the car, and took me to some of the wildest areas in St. Pete. And my contribution was wildly different had I not had that experience. So I thought that was just a nice build of John's role modeling and being inspired by others.
Yeah, I love
That's
that. And
fantastic.
empathy, depth of empathy, Audrey. You know what it looks and feels like, and that you know, those locations that maybe you haven't seen before.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
And as a result, you consider things you would not even have thought about had you only been in the boardroom that only met once a quarter.
Indeed. Yeah.
So moving forward, one of the things I want to highlight in design thinking is I want to draw a little bit of a contrast to I alluded to P&G people have this sense of urgency to want to solve things and fix things. And one of the things that I have kind of mapped is this idea of a lot of times corporations start with a hypothesis. And the hypothesis is not only the problem that they're trying to solve, but also the solution. And so the problem space, the problem definition space is incredibly narrow, inspired by a number of things. Some of it is previous research that they may have already done. The solution space is atypical. And then I call the justification space. There are 2 or 3 different rounds of research that are done to make sure I don't get fired, that this thing isn't going to fail, that it's going to hit the launch objectives. And this, you know, this research, refine, validate kind of step that a lot of large corporations take because it's safe for the people that are in those roles to go through that. And I contrast that with the design thinking framework, where the problem definition space is much wider. And it's a discovery and a definition inside of that. And it even leaks a little bit into the beginning of the ideation space. And then the solution space really is ideation, prototyping, and testing. And how do you refine that and use those processes as a way of, in essence, validating the idea and then putting it out into the market space. And it's a very, very different way, often uncomfortable way for large companies to think about problem solving. But it's profound because it keeps that consumer, that user, that employee at the center of what you're trying to deliver. Any builds on this, Holly and Audrey?
You know, John, I love this because I think it hits on some of the organizational issues that we see quite often as well, right? You talked about, you know, safe for people to play in, and, you know, this whole concept of psychological safety made famous by Harvard professor Amy Edmondson, and also really well explained in her book called The Fearless Organization. right? She talks about the importance of climates and cultures where you can raise your hand and share a wild and crazy idea, and to feel supported in doing so, and to not expect judgment, whether that's performance judgment or evaluation, or interpersonal judgment, getting a dirty look on, are you kidding? That's so ridiculous. Why would you share an idea like that? But how do we create those climates where this is normal and this is okay, right? And we start to really understand what problem is it that we're solving, and to fall in love with that end user and the problem before we jump into ideation at all, right? I feel like this flips that conventional model on its head. So often we fall in love with the idea or the solution before we even have done the heavy lifting on, wow, what really is the problem as expressed by the end user, not expressed by maybe someone sitting in a corner office somewhere, right?
Yep, good point. One of the things, we have a question that has come in regarding empathy. How might we reimagine the idea of walking the floor, or getting the smell of the place, if you will, in the context of COVID, where we're not able to be in a consumer's home and not able to shop along with them responsibly and safely? Any thoughts, Holly and Audrey?
Yeah, John, maybe I can hop in and share some of the work that we were doing with one of our clients that I felt was very simple yet very impactful. And so not always necessarily connected to the shop floor, but this notion and this principle of how do you walk in the shoes of others, and how do you connect with people around you in your business, wherever their floor is. And so one of the things that we actually had the leadership team do, and they broadly had maybe between 8 and 10 people as a direct report. So we had each of them do an empathy map for every one of their direct reports. And we know that doesn't take terribly long. And then the second thing we said is, how does the conversations need to shift? Instead of starting your Zoom call with, how are you doing? How about you start with, how can I support you in this moment? What are the best ways that I can support you in this moment? How is what's on your mind affecting you today? And so really shifting from this superficial level to this very empathetic level, and doing it through conversations, because we can't physically be in that space. So how do we create some of the emotion and the empathy in the conversations? I wondered if that helps to start to give some ideas around that, John.
That's fantastic, Audrey. Holly, any thoughts?
Yeah, I love that. What a great example, Audrey. And you think about, empathy mapping, it's one of the most prominent tools that we use in design thinking, which captures, what are you thinking about? What are you feeling, right? What are you saying? What are you doing? And, not only is that a really great way to tap into what's happening at the individual level, but, to Gina's question around, if you did that with a collection of people on your team, you start to get a snapshot of what are the patterns, right? What are the trends that you can see across the organization that can help you as a leader really lean into, hey, something's going on here. I need to tackle this, or, wow, this seems to be a common thread or a common theme. Do I want to celebrate that, or do I want to, is it something great that you can celebrate and shine a light on and lift up to other parts of the organization? But as you start to look through this lens of pattern finding, after doing that mapping and visualization of individuals on your team, you can start to sense and to get a sense of the pulse, much like you would if you were walking the shop floor. So I love that. And the ad would be to keep doing it and start to look for those patterns.
And the build I would offer is one of the observations that I've had specifically about the COVID circumstances that we're all navigating is it has inherently raised the level of empathy for all of us.
Yeah.
If you go back a year or two, you remember the BBC reporter whose kids ran into the room, and then the housekeeper or wife ran into the room, and it was just, and we were all embarrassed for him, but we laughed hysterically. Well, that's happening every day now.
Yeah.
And you hear the dog barking, and someone's at the door, and the kids come in asking for help with homework. And you get a peek into people's lives. And as a result, I think people are more willing to be candid, to build on Audrey's comment about asking those questions. And the same is true of consumers. They're willing to videotape circumstances and activities that you might otherwise have watched them perform if you were looking over their shoulder. And they're willing to do those things. And I think finding that opportunity to do that live video or recorded video is a great opportunity from a consumer perspective to be able to get into the heads and minds and hearts of consumers. Hopefully that helps, Gina.
Yeah, I love that. We've got another question coming in, John, around, aren't we really advocating for problem identification before launching into fixing it? It includes understanding what the problem is and what is not the problem. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. We're advocating to understanding the problem before launching into fixing it, because we're wired for that space of problem solving, right? As I talked earlier, and how do we really get comfortable in that problem finding space, which sometimes is ambiguous. But the most important step we can take in that space is figuring out what really is the real problem, because sometimes then the solutions are obvious.
Well, and not only that, Mr. or Ms. Anonymous, I think that is exactly what we're advocating. And in fact, when I do abbreviated versions of design thinking training, I overemphasize empathy and definition and prototyping. And I underemphasize, from a time commitment, ideation and testing. And it is absolutely that. It's the discovery end, because a lot of times we come into an initiative opportunity already having defined what we think the problem is. Oh, we need to, and worse, the problem is a business metric. We need to increase share. We need to improve profit. We need to drive sales. If those are your primary problems, try again, because those are actually symptoms and metrics of something else that's happening in your system. And how do you, one of the things Holly and I kind of laugh about this because we say it a lot, is how might we encourage you to fall in love with the problem, not the solution.
Mm-hmm. And to use consumer language for defining the problem, right? Such that if you shared it with your grandmother over a glass of lemonade on the front porch at a socially distanced length, right? Would she understand what the heck you're talking about? And it's not corporate wah, 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 right? How do you really understand what is it for people? And sometimes that's really hard because we like to use our fancy acronyms and business metrics, but that doesn't matter to consumers or employees as people in that sense. So yeah, thank you. Great question.
Excellent perspective. So let's move along. So Holly, you want to kind of jump in with an incredibly intuitive visual here.
Yeah, thanks for that, John. Wow, this is the third time I've shared this picture today, so I'm excited to talk about it. Right, this idea of why does design thinking matter, and why does this whole concept of human-centeredness really show up today? So in this picture, some urban planner was paid an awful lot of money, one would expect, to design a park and a flow of how people would get through that park. Only user experience said, I don't think so. User experience said, I'm taking the shortcut. I'm getting from point A to point B as quickly as possible. And oh, by the way, I've worn a path over the probably expensive sod that was placed in this spot as well. And how often do we have these exact same experiences in our lives, right? The system that we're operating in was not designed for us to have the ideal experience. And so we find a workaround, or we have a compensatory behavior, right? When I got trained as an IDEO facilitator, one of the things that we talked there from an example standpoint was they were working on a prescription bottle research project, and all of the survey evidence didn't indicate there was a problem. But one of the leaders said, I'm just convinced something's going on here and we haven't quite cracked it yet. And if you think about prescription bottles, that sweet spot between, not easy enough for a kid to open, but easy enough for an adult to open without, pulling out a bunch of additional tools. And so they went in to do some in-person research, and You talk to the consumer about what's your experience. Oh, I don't have a problem. Great. Can you show me? You know, they walk into the kitchen together. The consumer pulls the bottle out of the cabinet, proceeds to grab a steak knife and pry the lid open. And you say, hold on a second. You told me you didn't have a problem. And they said, well, I don't. I figured out my workaround. I can do this. It's no problem. You know, and you would say, until you slice open your hand. So how do we get really intentional about designing experiences, product services, experiences, employee experiences, just as much as branded service experiences, right? As we do solving those in that way, right? How do we get intentional about this and to be really, really clear on what's it doing for people? Because you can see the wonderful condition that the pavers are in the sidewalk, right? They appear to not have been used. And how many times do we have those same kind of experiences in our lives? So I hope that this image really does land the plane for you on the importance of why this matters and why it matters arguably now more than ever when, you know, people have less mind share and mind space available to just deal with things that aren't working for them anymore, right? How do we lean into these experiences and opportunity spaces to make these moments delightful and memorable and meaningful for the people that we're serving?
And a build on that, Holly, is this notion of how our functional reward systems, our functional alignments and expectations often jade how we see a problem as well. Audrey talked about our core DNA. Are we wired to be empathetic or not empathetic or action-oriented or athletic or something else? Our work expectations also set the stage for how we see something or how we interpret something. And all the way at the end, the lower right, you see what the customer wanted. But each of these functional silos interpreted that in a different way. And this is a little bit of fun with some extreme extensions of that. But the reality is, I think we've all been in initiatives where things couldn't get done. And the thing that I often laugh about is my clients, my prospects and connections who say, oh, we've got empathy nailed. You know, we know what's going on with the consumer, but man, John in finance, he is a barrier to everything I do. And so the idea of empathy seems to be conditional or only external instead of how we work and behave together. And then similarly, there's this idea of looking at challenges with kids in a classroom on their phones, instead of mandating them putting the phones down where they're going to be inclined to pick it back up again. Is there a different way to help them engage and to see the problem and then create solutions that might not have been expected? So with that, we want to share a couple of brands who have done this, and Holly, I'll let you kick off with OXO.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to check in on one of the questions as well in the Q&A, John, before we jump into OXO around, have we encountered instances where prototyping falls short, right? And supporting path design to print development, we've observed that traditional prototyping, having it in our hand, right, often bypasses whether something is feasible. And so sometimes results in disappointment. So one of the models of kind of really honing in on a successful design thinking program is kind of hitting this sweet spot of desirability, feasibility, and then kind of viability, right? You know, can we do it, right? Should we do it? And does anybody want it, right? How do you hit this sweet spot in those three areas? And kind of absolutely hitting on, wow, how do you use that prototype as an opportunity to say, here's what we'd like to do. Let's go find out if that's possible. And to start with those assumptions and questions in that space as well. So absolutely important to explore. We're not sure if we can do this yet, but we're going to put our best team on that to go figure it out. So I think that's something that's really important as we think about prototyping as well. And absolutely something that came out in the OXO launch. So OXO, maybe you've seen these kitchen products, maybe you have some in your kitchen. I have the can opener and I have a collection of the measuring cups, which are fantastic, despite not being shown here in this collection. But the idea of OXO, this was, you know, probably heard of Farberware. Mr. Farber was trying to figure out how to develop products for his wife that had arthritis. And as a result of arthritis, very limited dexterity. And so he worked on developing this line of products that really could make it easier for her to continue to do something she loved, which was cooking in her kitchen. And so you can see these big chunky handles were easier to pick up, right? You didn't have to squeeze as tightly as you would on a traditional vegetable peeler, for example. And so they launched, and the first go round wasn't quite as sticky as they had hoped. And then they continued to go at it and start to tell the story and do some better commercialization exercises. And what they learned is, wow, this line of products, OXO, really has gone on to be such a success, not just for the niche market of people who have limited dexterity due to arthritis or other conditions, but because it's easier for everyone. So a great example of taking an extreme user and saying, how do we design a solution that is really empathetic to their needs? And what happens is, wow, the result is something everybody likes better. And so here's the trajectory of their growth. And who wouldn't want to 4x their business over the period of a decade? And how important this is to really keep the needs of people in mind, right? One of the hiccups that we see often is that people design for themselves because it's fun and we know ourselves really well and we know what we like. And my friend Phil Gilbert, who's the head of design at IBM, says, you are not your user. And I would take 10 one-hour interviews over 1,000 survey data points any day of the week, because you're going to get the depth and the richness of clarity and stories and emotion and meaning out of those interviews that, when was the last time a survey result of, hey, it was a 4.7 out of 5, brought you to tears, right? Or made you feel something? It's probably not going to happen. And so how do you choose those depth of stories? So John, I'm going to hand it over to you for method. This is a great one too. Keep going. Yeah.
So similarly, method, most P&Gers know method because they were the evil competitor to a lot of Procter cleaning products. And so method, when they first launched, they began launching in beautiful bottles, beautiful artifacts that people were proud to have out on their sinks and countertops. And one of the things that one of their co-founders, Eric Ryan, talked about was the idea of, they said we could never outspend any of our competitors or all of them. SC Johnson, Colgate, Procter, Clorox, Henkel Dial. And so they said, we viewed creating these beautiful artifacts and cutting steel, making the molds to create them, which Procter saw as a supply chain expense. We saw cutting steel as a media expense because it gave us an opportunity to get free publicity in trade publications via social media. And similar to the OXO story, their story was $12 million in revenue in 2004 and almost $1 billion today. And in 2017, we're actually acquired by one of those competitors, SC Johnson. And so the idea of competing on the basis of creating these beautiful artifacts and trying to bring joy to people's lives, and that began to further reinforce a story they told about being good for the planet and being good for users. And their Chicago plant is powered entirely by alternative renewable energy, solar and wind. And so part of this is, how do you find a way to compete? Because sometimes the way you choose to compete in and of itself resonates with a consumer base. And it also forces you by, it's no accident that you behave differently than your competition. Another story that I'll share, and you all can Google Doug Dietz and TED Talk. And this is really about a transformational. When you do, you may want to have your puffs tissues because it gets emotional. But one of the things Doug talked about was they didn't change the MRI machine, but they were catering to children's hospitals and children's use. And they created a story for children to step into, instead of this ominous machine that was really loud and they had to hold still. They created the story, and the technicians engaged in the story to say, okay, you're getting on this pirate ship and you have to hold still so you don't walk the plank. And if you hold really still, then the fish are going to swim around you as the MRI spins. And it became an engaging story, so much so that one of the things that GE Healthcare learned was about 80% of children needed to be sedated in order to be able to stay still enough for an MRI to capture accurate results. And what they found was everywhere they had installed a story installation like the one on the right, that less than 5% of children needed to be sedated for that process. And some of them, and Doug will, if you know the YouTube video or you see it, Doug says there was one child that he witnessed said, "Can we come back and do this tomorrow?" And one of the quotes I love as it relates to some of the things that we all get caught up in is when you design for meaning, good things happen. When you design for money and you hope that the meaning comes, well, it doesn't work that way. And so if you have to back into your story and it's not authentic, then the consumer's going to know that. And then the last one is kind of the ubiquitous example of Apple, perhaps overused and perhaps less effective today than they were 5 years or 10 years ago. But they're catering to serve their users. And in fact, their big push for privacy most recently is indicative of that. And as a result, they're the most valuable company on the planet. And they've created experiences, their retail experience, though very, very little you could pick up and walk out, buy and walk out of a store. But it's the highest sales per square foot of any other retail environment anywhere in the world. And so it becomes this opportunity. And so one of the things as we kind of transition, would love to hear from you in the chat function or the Q&A function. What are your favorite human-centered brands or services, experiences, or companies? Any thoughts? And let's use the chat for this if you could. Nobody has any favorites?
Disney.
There we go.
Katie, great. Yes, Disney.
It's amazing that the Disney parks are open now, and the people that I know that have gone are delighted because they feel safe, it feels clean, and it still delivers that Disney experience. Some additional ones as people are entering that for me, I think about a Procter product like Swiffer. Swiffer was, when it was created, it wasn't necessarily about a better cleaning, but a better cleaning experience. And it was designed to take advantage of the snippets of time that we have in our life between things. Between homework and dinner, I want to get some cobwebs up, or I just did some baking. And so it was a masterful way of trying to help enhance how I feel about clean.
Yeah, some nice ones coming in the chat now, John, around Amazon for sure. In fact, I think I just got an alert saying that my package has been delivered, and boy, that's magic, right? There's lots of other retail experiences where I wish they were that in tune with hey, here's a picture of your delivery, or here's an out of stock if you're ordering Amazon Prime. Really, really not great experiences with some other retailers, some of which are very local to our Cincinnati area that are not great. And you think about, wow, the opportunity space to make that better. Netflix streaming coming in this space as well. Repeating the question, yeah, David, happy to do that. What are your favorite human-centered brand services or experience companies that you want to highlight? Stuart, yeah, Kroger coupons. They only send you stuff for the things that they know you buy, which is kind of a blessing and a curse, right? They know too much about you, but they've got you nailed for sure on the things that you really want to go and buy again. Yeah, Grace, thanks for that. Assistance for the elderly on Delta. Yeah, absolutely. It is pretty much end to end, right? Doorway to doorway on some great service there. Coming from a Diamond Medallion member from last year anyway. I don't know what that means for the coming year, right? I saw a lot of that going on. Yeah, Uber, right? One click. Yeah, absolutely right. I'll share Ritz-Carlton. When I landed in Bangalore, had one of those little hard wallets that had the RFID case on it, and it's kind of snapped shut, and mine just completely broke when I went to check into the Ritz-Carlton in Bangalore. And the next morning, the hotel staff member showed up at, knocking on my door with a new wallet. And I thought, wow, it was like 2 a.m. And when I was checking in, and she comes in and hands me oh, here, Mrs. O'Driscoll, I noticed that, you might find this in handy given that you had a challenge with your wallet last night. And I thought, oh, she cares, right? And she saw that struggle, and she absolutely, went to take care of that in that moment. Turkish Airlines Lounge, yeah, in Istanbul.
Veronica, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. So lots of good examples, and I love that they're from several different sectors, John, right? And
Yep.
How do we do more of having our kind of minds tuned into, was this moment or this product or this experience or this time in an organization really designed for me to love that, to find meaning, to be delighted, to feel like I am cared for in that moment.
Yep. Yeah, one that came in from Gina also is kind of misfit markets, ugly organic produce that's not perfect for delivery, but can be used in different ways. In fact, there's a company I know in California called the Ugly Company,
right,
which is designed exactly. They create dried fruit snacks out of fruit that would have been rejected by people who buy only on good looking things. And this is a startup, former military, former Army Ranger, and his parents are in the farming business, and how much produce goes to waste and just gets plowed and rotted in fields because it's not pretty. It's got a bruise, it's misshapen, and it's perfectly good for a consumer to consume. So as we move forward, thank you all. And if you have any others, please feel free to chime them in. David, thanks for Target. Being human-centered, as hopefully you're getting the idea, it's not just about creating things, but it's about how you might discover and understand and solve, how you might collaborate with peers or leadership or consumers, how you might lead and inspire. And importantly, a big mindset element of design thinking and being human-centered is rather than seeing failure as failure, it's the opportunity to learn, the opportunity to enhance and improve and to learn something new. Oh, we thought we understood the problem, but when we launched, that wasn't the problem we actually tried to solve. And it provides this opportunity and a real mindset to inspire learning, to be curious, to be consummately curious, and then to use that as a way of developing and advancing. And so kind of using that as our segue into human-centered leadership. Holly and Audrey, Holly would love to get you to start, but the star of the leadership show is Audrey here. So
yeah. So no, thanks so much, John. And I think to kind of pave the way for Audrey to talk more about leadership, this idea of really dialing into human-centeredness as a way of leading others. And these are some snapshots from HBR articles that have been served up to the world in the past several years. But this idea of the higher you go in the organization, the research says that you're actually less empathetic the higher you go. And maybe that makes some of you quite uncomfortable, but it's backed by research and really does kind of shine a light on how can we be more intentional about being empathetic as we advance in our organizations and as we lead others. And this idea of, wow, you better learn to empathize with your people to know what it looks and feels like to be them. So I love Audrey's example of kind of walking the shop floor and workarounds for doing that in a digital context. But understanding those pain points, I would even add that this is important if you're even in the recruiting space. So, as a new applicant comes to the organization, what's that experience like? Have you heard back from the organization in 3 months? What are some of those lag times that maybe are no longer acceptable? Maybe they were never acceptable, but we took it, down the path of, I'm the large organization and I'm going to make up the rules and they're going to figure out if they want to work here, they'll play by those rules. And you say, I don't know if that level of arrogance is working any longer. So how do we empathize not only with current employees, but also prospective employees, right? And past employees, right? What does it look and feel like as a retiree? What are those experiences that you're having? What are those touch points like? And how do you connect the dots more intentionally there? And then, wow, what organization in the world is not experiencing some kind of change in this moment? And how do we use empathy to say, hey, I know this change is hard, and let's partner to figure out how to navigate this, and how can I support you, and what are the ways in which we can get through this together. So human-centeredness in leadership is not about the things that we learned in MBA school, certainly not the things I learned there, right? Which was more be decisive, be strategic, right? Come with an assertive point of view, offer direction. Those things matter, but these are skills that, Simon Sinek calls human skills, right? In the past, they were known as soft skills. And soft made them, maybe a little more easily to be pushed aside, right? And human skills, this is the moment for human skills to really show up in our leaders across all different parts of business and in the public sector and nonprofit space as well. So I'll use that as a backdrop, Audrey, to unpack some more human-centeredness in leadership.
Yeah, I'm going to, Holly and John both know that I like to straddle this piece around research and data, and yet I love the practical nature of this work. So I'm hopefully going to share some personal and practical stories that you can really think and build from. And let me share a personal story, and it was again an unforgettable moment in my career where I experienced empathy on the other side from a leader. And so I had been working with a huge multinational Fortune 120 organization, and as did my husband at the time. And so he was their chief supply chain officer, and I was their chief talent officer. And we had just acquired a huge acquisition in China. I think it might have been a $15 billion acquisition. And so they needed him to relocate to Asia for 4 years to really lead the acquisition from a supply chain standpoint. And yet they also needed to be sure that the human aspect was taken care of. And so I had a different boss at the time to my husband. And what happened in the background was those two leaders got together, and they didn't use a formal empathy map, but the work they did was very empathetic. They said, Audrey has 2 twin 8-year-old daughters. What does this mean for her in her life? Her husband's going to be asked to go here. She has a career she's very proud of. I mean, all of the things you could imagine. And they stayed in that problem long enough before they were seduced by jumping too quickly to communicating the solution. And I can tell you that created so much psychological safety for me and my husband. It created such emotion and connection to an organization. And imagine if you could do that with all of your employees. I mean, I normally have a whiteboard, which I'm missing, but sometimes I draw the productivity gap, and you maybe can't see this, but when there's a change, this is what's on the table, which is dollars. Now, we know we don't chase the money, and how you get to the money is through the emotion, and how you get to the money is through the meaning. So imagine if you could really get to meaning with your employees with such an individualized experience. And imagine how you could distribute that leadership so that it doesn't fall on one person. And so I hook that onto the career management side of the HR human capital work. And I also hook it onto leadership. So it's a story that really emphasizes how might we as an organization be more curious about dual career paths in one organization, which can be normal now. And then how as leaders might we tackle that problem? And so I share that example as a personal one. I think the other example I wanted to share, John, I'm not sure if it's on the next slide.
Yep.
Let me see what's here. It was the Facebook one I was thinking about. Yeah, yep. There we are. One of my dear friends had sent me a note on Facebook to say, I'm starting my new job today. I feel so loved, I feel so welcomed, and I feel ready to take on the world. So imagine the emotional connection when she shows up and on her desk is a handwritten note instead of a handbook from HR. And so this difference in the emotional connection really creates a very positive energy for the employee experience. And we know that that propels productivity, and we know it propels engagement. So that's just an example of what might a first day look like. And if we had to label this is really around the onboarding process in the human capital space. And what does that onboarding process look like for people who may be joining your team? You may not be the HR leader or the human capital leader, but what might you do to make that just a very engaging experience? So those are two examples. John, I have many examples. I don't know if we're going to keep going or we're going to flip back to some of the other stuff. I did want to share the work that Holly and I have been doing on leadership, but I want to do it right at the right moment. So I'll be guided by you.
Well, I think on this first day, I think I'll just make a comment to all of the P&G alums out in the audience that I'm sure all of you have had examples of, as you've moved through your P&G career from role to role, or leaving P&G and moving to other roles, where you've had a first day experience that inspired you and wanted you to give all of your mental space to that role in that organization. And there are others you probably felt ignored and devalued because nobody knew what the schedule was. They didn't have time for you. They gave you that binder to read. And so part of it is some of these things are incredibly small. An offer letter. Is it just a letter that you send in the mail, or is there something that makes that person feel valued that they've joined this organization? Or a team, as a new member of a team comes on, and importantly, a team member rolls off. I remember an example when Carrie Clark was leaving P&G to go be the CEO at Cardinal Health. Normally, the process was it just showed up in an announcement. Those Thursday executive announcements at Procter. Well, AG sent a preamble to that to thank Carrie, to talk about the contributions and celebrate everything he had done at Procter, and to celebrate his success in his new role. And it was such an incredibly simple but powerful, never seen before kind of activity. And so again, it doesn't have to be somebody with chief in their title that leads these things. It can be anyone, anywhere in the organization. And Holly, I think you even had a memorable story related to another P&G CEO.
Yeah, for sure. And wow, I feel like this has come up many times. And, I'm thinking of John Pepper, right? And John Pepper made the comment as related to leadership on, how might we really strive to be one of those people that others think of when they look back and reflect and think, wow, if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be who I am today or where I am today, or have learned all the things that I've learned, or had this terrific journey or experience. And how might we aspire to go after that, right? Such that when others think of, wow, if it wasn't for them, how do you be on that list as a leader, right? And how do you leave those marks with people that really allow a legacy to show up in that way that is rooted in all things human-centeredness, right? So yep. Thanks, John. A couple things that I think are really important that we've seen be really hallmarks of places where design thinking and human-centeredness can thrive. And these are things that I call the 3 C's: curiosity, courage, candor. And how do we bring more of these to life? So I'm going to unpack each one quickly as well. Curiosity is really rooted in this space of openness for being wrong. If we can go to the next slide, John.
Yep.
Yeah. the openness for being wrong, this space for really bringing more curiosity to that entire conversation. So instead of saying, I'm not sure I agree with you, I think the conversation's over, and you walk away with an eye roll, which maybe we've all been in those moments, right? How do you lean in and say, I'm not sure I agree, can you tell me more? That's curiosity, right? That's suspending judgment. If you think about courage, right? Courage in this space of wow, how can I support the moonshot, really bringing this wild and crazy idea to life, and I'm going to say it anyway, even if maybe it's unpopular. And then this space for candor, this openness, this humility to say, wow, candor is not the brutally honest, right, truth, or the hard truth. This is about care and compassion and transparency and honesty. So reaching for some of those points, right, really make a difference in a human-centered culture. And when you think about those conditions, right, why does this matter? We talked earlier around the importance of role modeling, right? Audrey shared the story of the CEO walking the shop floor and role modeling those behaviors. And the leadership behavior is so foundationally critical, right? Because it starts to model for everyone else what's okay. And how are things done here? And what's the smell of the place? I think that topic came out in one of the questions earlier. And how do we do that, right? By changing the mindsets from a command and control mindset to one that says, hey, I'm here in service of you and the organization, and to make sure that we're able to bring our full selves to work every day and really unleash the full potential that's living inside of each one of us, right? That's a really different frame than kind of a traditional leadership model, kind of leaning into that transformation space. And then this conscious unlearning, right? I feel like this is a new topic. Can you imagine a time when you go to a training and it's about unlearning instead of, trying to build the skill set in that way? You're actually intentionally building a skill set on unlearning some of the things that aren't serving you well, right? Like looking for the business metric as the reason that the project is happening, right? Where is that meaning that's coming from this space? And how do we think about these conditions as far as, setting the climate, the stage for people to really operate with those principles of human-centeredness and design thinking that we talked around earlier, the empathy, the problem definition, the ideation, the prototyping, and the testing.
And then want to tee up some work that that Holly and Audrey have done. Audrey has done with respect to a leadership journey, but it kind of is emblematic of what we've been talking about around being human-centered. How do you highlight these things? So Audrey, can you and Holly share?
Sure. Holly and I can tag team this one. I'll be happy to kick us off and talk about the genesis of this work. And this is a piece of work that we've been doing with one of our clients that's not too far away, but certainly the genesis for the work was a CEO that had a leadership team who were close to retiring, so he had some succession issues. He also had a cadre of leaders that had a very engineering bias and a very engineering focus. And in addition, they were a very low profit margin business, which meant that there wasn't many years of investment. And so that manifested in leaders who didn't have high capability in the area of leadership, and particularly in human-centered leadership. And so his vision was, how do I take the team on a journey? And the first lesson is really about, it's never one and done. It's never you give somebody a tool, they do it, and we're done. It's this journey of evolution and learning. And so we took this team on a journey, and we launched it in the summer of 2019. And you heard me talking at the beginning of we're all wired a certain way. And so we wanted to create a level of self-awareness with these leaders on what is their natural wiring. Therefore, where are they going to have to flex to be these human-centered leaders that the CEO knew needed to be present to run the business. So they all had assessments. It's a tool we use called Predictive Index. And it gives you a sense of, am I formal, informal? Am I innovative, less innovative? Do I have a sense of urgency? Am I detail oriented? And so they all had this deep insight into their own personal style of leadership. And then they actually got 360 feedback. I know that the P&G alumni are very familiar with this type of work, but for me, it's the connective tissue that runs through the journey, and not what we call the verticals, but more the horizontals. So the horizontal running through all of this is human-centeredness. So they also got their 360 feedback, which builds their self-awareness. And then we launched some human-centered leadership capability sessions, and we did them virtually, because this is a company that has locations in Poland and Romania, Thailand, India, Vietnam, and also in the US. But this notion of enterprise-wide leadership was also important, which is, what can we learn from each other? And how might we show up for the greater good of the organization? We also built in some podcasts, which was another medium for these leaders to learn and hear from either board members or different sets of people. Actually, we brought in a yogi instructor who taught meditation. As you can imagine, that was wildly different to what these engineering leaders anticipated, and yet it took them to a level of discomfort that they felt stretched them and their leadership. And so, I'm not going to go through every one of those, but you get the idea that this is about building your leadership capabilities. It's about doing it in a human-centered way. And it's about starting with a level of self-awareness. Now, Holly, let me see what you would build on that, and then pass the ball back to me, and we'll tell the story together.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So it's been such a pleasure to partner with Audrey on this leadership journey for the client. And, one of the ads that I have there is congruent with the conversation we had earlier around role modeling. So, at the start of the journey, the CEO stands up and tells his life story and talks about his experiences and gets vulnerable in front of the top 50 executives that certainly are pivotal to running the operation, and using those opportunities to, one, demonstrate vulnerability, to do that with great authenticity and share the stories of one's life experience, and to then ladder that back to how it shaped your own personal leadership philosophy, really, really is a wonderful manifestation of human-centered leadership. If you think about empathy, right, really building that sense of self-awareness and sharing the stories that help everybody feel like, wow, at the end of the day, we are people. We are not our titles, right? We are humans that have families that we care about, and lives and dreams that we're aspiring to, and this is about finding our collective humanity. And what happened there is it really set the stage for others to demonstrate vulnerability and to bring their moments of truth to life. And use that as an opportunity to bring their authentic leadership to the surface. And they had never done that before. And so creating these spaces to allow leaders to role model and to set the expectation of why that matters so much was really some new thinking. And I think in this example, having a leader that said, hey, I'm up for that, was just really lovely. Maybe some other leaders are a little less comfortable, and maybe some of the leaders in the room, where we know a few, Audrey, that were less comfortable doing that, but they did it anyway because the CEO modeled the behavior and showed the strength of character to push through some of those tough moments when he was talking about his life map and the journey, and to be able to set that example as being so critical. So I think sometimes we underestimate as leaders the impact we have on the collective organization. And boy, what an opportunity to say, hey, people are watching, and are you engaging in a human-centered way? And are you bringing those examples and those stories to life in a way that say, I'm going to model what it looks and feels like to be a human-centered leader, and I expect you to do the same.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, Holly, even when you and I tell this story, we both come at it from different angles,
Right.
which is this notion of authenticity, right? And what do we see in this moment? And you know, one of the helpful models that I like to teach in our sessions is when we think about empathy, it has to come from an authentic place.
Mm.
And to come from an authentic place, you have to be vulnerable. And to be vulnerable takes courage. And so the invitation is, which one of us are courageous enough to be that empathetic leader?
Mhm.
And I think what we saw in that moment was a very courageous CEO who found the courage to stand up in front of 50 people and be vulnerable. But he did it in a very authentic way. Therefore, it came across as empathetic.
Mhm.
And the value and the upside of that is huge.
Yeah.
I've actually heard from I survey some of the external clients of the people that we build leadership capabilities with. So I'll go outside the organization and actually ask the customer, the external customer, and they've specifically told me, we will give this particular organization more business. We will give them more share of wallet than their other three competitors because of the quality of their leadership and because of the authenticity of their culture. And I think that, you know, we can put all sorts of stats and numbers around that, but that's such a powerful testament to come from an external customer, right? Where they can physically see this leadership capability.
Yeah. And the value, right? The value proposition. Yeah, absolutely is real. It might appear as intangibles, right? If you were to have it on the balance sheet, right? But these things absolutely make a difference in the business.
Yeah.
The thing I'll add to this, it got me the story, your principles and your framework, Audrey, that you just shared, kind of strikes me. One of the things that I see, because a lot of my clients, very much like the clients that both of you have, kind of run the gamut, but probably have a relatively similar lane. For me, it's a very common lane is consumer packaged goods. And one of the things I see is the way they go about business. The pendulum has swung from trying to understand the consumer to data and analytics, and it becomes, you know, almost analytical in terms of what the choices they make.
Yeah.
And we see that in a lot of brands seeming to become more mechanical and losing the sense of emotion and passion that people had for that brand. And it's no different for human relationships. You know, we all read the studies, and in fact, many of the people on this call left P&G maybe because of a person at P&G. You know, people leave companies not to leave the company, they leave a person or a circumstance.
Yeah.
And those relationships go the other way as well. You know, I was incredibly inspired by this leader. I was inspired by the opportunity to step into a space. Audrey, you mentioned courage, but I also want to put a foundation. Holly mentioned a term, psychological safety. That we can all be more courageous if the platform feels safer for us to be vulnerable. Yeah. And a lot of that is leadership setting that role model. I would say let's begin to wrap up so that we might be able to have a few moments for the audience to chime in with questions or to sing the praises of Audrey and Holly. And so I'll just leave this for you to think about. We won't go through this, but think about, as we've talked about this, what might be things that get in the way of being more human-centered in our work and in our personal lives. but I'll leave that there. We also have, and we're happy to make this presentation available to people. This session is being recorded so that you can go back and take a look. But what I want to do is per Holly's great slide here, is invite people to offer their own experiences, to ask questions if you have some. How might we, a typically framed problem statement, how might we do something? But thank you all for your time and your investment, and hopefully this was somewhat helpful for all of those listening.
Yeah, John, I'm going to make one more add to the "you're invited" piece. Would love to have those still on the line with us. If you were to summarize your time together with us today, if there's one word or one phrase that kind of stands out for you to kind of put a bow on our time, would love to have that featured in the chat as just kind of a quick pulse check on some real-time feedback. Would be super helpful. So would love to hear any questions as well, comments, stories.
And while you're adding that, I'll offer, Dave Chalmers asked a question some time ago. Interesting, going beyond the idea of focusing on problem versus solution, isn't this also encouragement to have primary attention on the user versus me? What do I get out of this? Recognition, market share, profit, promotion, etc. Any thoughts on that build? I think it's exactly right. And in fact, one of the things, one of the audiences I often coach are creative agencies trying to reach corporate clients. And I tell them to stop thinking about pitching the company, Procter & Gamble, and start thinking about pitching the individuals in the room. What might your agency do to help that person either feel more comfortable with your firm and what you can deliver, or achieve some of their own goals, visibility, promotion, hey, I've got to dig this brand performance out of a ditch, or carry that forward, instead of self-focusing on promotion and visibility and those things.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we're getting another question, John, from Grace saying, any suggestions to unpack the issue of division and how we might solve it? And I'm going to take an interpretation of that, Grace, around division in kind of culture and our communities. And when I think about going after that, it's really this return to empathy, right? How can we look at someone else's scenario, and instead of leaning into judgment and writing them off as wrong because their reality is different, or their lens is different, or their perspective is different, to say, can you tell me more? Right? It reminds me of an Abe Lincoln quote, which is, I do not like that man. I must get to know him better. It's not rooted in judgment. It's rooted in, wow, I haven't found that thing to love about them yet. Let me dig deeper with empathy and curiosity to start to bring that to life. And admittedly, that's really hard right now in our climate, and really necessary, right? If there's nothing that we learned at P&G, it was there's never a bad time to do the right thing. And how do you choose to do the right thing, even when it's really uncomfortable and really difficult? And that Abe Lincoln quote from many, many years ago of, I do not like that man, I must get to know him better, I think is a really wonderful framework in which to begin to lean into some of those more empathetic conversations, admittedly difficult ones.
And sometimes, Grace, that the division itself, if you think you're on one side of something or another, it often shades what you're willing to hear from the other side. And I think that's a lot of what we're seeing, particularly in a political context, which, don't talk religion and politics at family gatherings. So we'll avoid those things. But part of it is how might you lean in, as Holly said, understand the KPIs that are in place for a different organization. Finance won't release the capital I need to institute this. Well, why not? What's their measure? What's their metric? What are their goals? And what responsibilities do they feel to the business? And you could go through functional rewards. You can go those things and lean into, help me understand more about what that is.
Yeah, for sure. All right.
So Grace and Katie, thank you for sharing your key takeaways. David as well. And again, thank you all for your investment. And I think most of the people that joined us in this stayed for the entire time. So it's a wonderful gift to us that you stayed. So thank you.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
Hello,
thanks so
Stuart.
much.
Well, hello,
Thanks,
John.
Stuart.
Holly and Audrey. This was fantastic. Thank you. Great engagement from the audience. And I was getting a lot of calls. Some people had trouble logging at the last minute. I'm going to be following up with them directly. They will be getting a link to the recording. In fact, everyone on this will be getting a link to the recording. We'll make sure and send Audrey and Holly and John's contact info so you can follow up with them, as well as contact info from our sponsor, Johnson Investments, and Mike Stannis. Thank you very much for making these things possible. And the next event will be a holiday party online. So an online social event. We have something very creative in mind, so I won't spoil this thing, but watch your inbox. And everybody have a great afternoon and hope to see you at the next event. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Stuart.
much.
Thanks all.
All right.